Good evening and hello. I'm David Wiegold. I'm the president of the DC chapter of the American Society of Media Photographers, the ASMP. Welcome to the Smithsonian American Art Museum. It's a real honor to host Mark Seliger here tonight. It's the second year that we're able to present in this beautiful theater, and I'd like to take a moment to thank the people who made this wonderful event possible. The museum director, thank you, Betsy Brune, the museum marketing manager, Amy Hutchins, and the museum external affairs staff, including Kaylin LePen. Where are you out there? Okay, and a special thanks goes out to the Center for Media and Social Impact School of Communications, the American University, for their generous financial support. Specifically, Lena Jaswal for her help. We love our sponsors. Also, I'd like to recognize especially the ASMP DC board. Putting together a program like this takes many, many months, and this all-volunteer group is incredible, and I'm very honored to be working with them to bring you guys great programs such as the one tonight. Thank you all, our board. If you're not familiar with the ASMP, please visit us at asmpdc.org. There you can sign up for our mailing list to be notified of upcoming events and programs and such. So now I'd like to introduce Michael Mansfield, who is the Smithsonian American Art Museum's curator of film and media arts. He'll be welcoming Mark Seliger. Thank you and enjoy.
Hello, and welcome to the Donald W. Reynolds Center for American Art and Portraiture. On behalf of the Smithsonian American Art Museum and our colleagues at the National Portrait Gallery, I'd like to welcome you for tonight's quite fascinating, I think, discussion with Mark Seliger. I'd like to extend a quick thank you to Ruth Levy, his producer, and his archivist, Brian Meter. Brian Meter is here. Ruth, I believe, is not here. But I think their assistance has been really invaluable in setting up a program like this at the museum, getting all the images together and helping us organize these things. So they're quite important folks. And I'd also like to say that I'm proud to share some Texas roots with Mark Seliger, who was born in Amarillo, Texas in 1959. I also grew up in Texas. He spent a few years in Amarillo before moving to Houston, Texas in 1964. His interest in photography really began very early in life. His first love quickly became the dark room, where the magic happens, and in this case it was in I think, his family's bathroom, where he began experimenting with developing negatives and printing photographs. He attended Houston's High School for the Performing and Visual Arts, and from there attended East Texas State University in Commerce, Texas. And that's where his education really began in earnest, studying the history of photography, history of documentary photography. He moved to New York City in 1984, and very quickly, in a very short 3 years, became a shooter for Rolling Stone in 1987. And in 1992 was signed as their chief photographer. And during his time at Rolling Stone, he shot well over 125 covers. I believe that number is actually quite a bit higher, but a little bit higher. In 2001, Mark moved from Rolling Stone to Condé Nast and began making images for Vanity Fair, Details, Italian Vogue, L'Uomo Vogue, and German Vogue. In 2011, he co-founded the nonprofit exhibition space for photography with Brent Langton called 401 Projects, where they mounted a number of significant exhibitions by contemporary photographers. And additionally, Mark organizes and hosts the Emmy-nominated Capture on YouTube's Reserve channel. This is a production that stages candid and really revealing conversations between established photographers such as Mary Ellen Mark, Martin Schuler, and Bob Gruen, with celebrities who are keenly interested in photography, such as Dylan McDermott, Helena Christensen, and Kevin Bacon. I particularly like that one. So if you get a chance to go on and look at some of these, I think they're really quite revealing. He continues his love of the darkroom and uses a palladium printing process. We had the opportunity to look at a few of these earlier today. They're really quite stunning images, really rich, fantastic photographs. He's published numerous books and is the esteemed recipient of the Alfred Eisenstadt Award, the Lucy Award for Outstanding Achievement in Portraiture, and the Clio Grand Prix. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Mark Seliger.
Thank you, guys. Sam, thank you so much. It's really nice to be here in the great walls of the Smithsonian, and lovely to speak to you guys. I think I've been to Washington Talk before years ago, but I just want to kind of articulate this is a very laid-back discussion, and I usually speak off the cuff more than a planned talk, but I will, and I'm going to be happy to answer any questions afterwards, so hold on to those questions. We can do this. Okay, so now I just have to figure out how this thing works here, which shouldn't be too complicated. Let's see. There we are. Okay, I figured it out. Can I turn this down just a little bit? Right on me? That's perfect. Thank you. So I've never done this presentation before. This is kind of a new thing. And Brian, who is my archivist here, Brian, where are you? There he is. There's Brian. Ladies and gentlemen, Brian Meter. He, young man who's been in my studio for just a little bit over, probably a year and a half, 2 years. And he's very involved in working with me on coordinating these slideshows, and then does all of our archiving at the studio and much more. Anyway, so we dug this old picture up. This is the first photograph I did in a documentary class in Texas at East Texas State University not the guy on the right. That guy is not from Texas. Want to establish that. But the guy on the left. So I was really influenced early on. My teacher was just pushing the history of photography, and my first real connection to portraiture was Arnold Newman, right? So get the connection. So I was a little bit of a, kind of a typical Gemini, right? So I had a couple of things I liked. Like there's 2 of me for sure, maybe 4. So I also loved Irving Penn. And I just thought it was really interesting, like in just the dialogue that we're going to have tonight about kind of the evolution of one's career and how portraiture has really many layers to it and a lot of depth to it. It's environmental, and then it's also the reduction of portraiture, which is clearly this picture of Obama, right? So we're going to get a little bit further into that, but I just kind of wanted to show you the range of like what I consider to be my best picture when I was starting out and what I consider to be my best picture, mid-career or whatever you want to call this that I'm doing. So I'm going to give you a couple little quick anecdotes about process. Now, if there's technique that you guys want to know about, we can talk about that a little bit later, but I'm going to tell you about the way that I create images, which I think is sort of my specialty. So when I started with Rolling Stone, I think clearly what gave me a jump forward was that I didn't really focus on black and white. I focused on color, right? So color photography was saturated. It printed really well in Rolling Stone magazine because it had such shitty paper, right? It's like the worst paper possible. So the more saturated and the more involved it was in terms of the like surreal quality, the better it looked on the page, right? So I almost had a kind of a cartoon experience with color. So I lit everything, and this was my 92 participation in a portfolio where there was 5 other photographers that were given portfolios. I was kind of the young buck at the time. So it was like Bruce Weber and Herb Ritz, and I was just literally like pissing in my pants about that I was going to be doing this. And they gave me 10 photographs to do. And the first one that I was assigned was Fleetwood Mac. Now, not the whole band, just Mick Fleetwood and John McVie, right? Is everybody familiar with Fleetwood Mac? Okay. All right. Love the record. Love the music. So they said, okay, here's your first assignment. Here's a number, which was really interesting because, talking to an artist for me was that was kind of a big deal. I didn't know what I was going to say to them at first, so I knew I had to come up with an idea. So I'd already thought about it. They had a 25th anniversary they were celebrating. Rolling Stone was celebrating, and I thought, oh man, how great would it be if they were doing a wedding picture together? And I thought, I don't know how I'm going to make this work, but I'm going to figure it out. And I called up Mick Fleetwood at the recording studio, and I said, he gets on the phone and goes, "Hello, Mark, it's Mick Fleetwood." I was like, "Hello, Mick, it's Mark." He goes, "What are your ideas for us?" And just like, I was like, oh, I guess I'm going to tell you my idea now. I was going to kind of wait on it. And I said, well, I was thinking about maybe you guys doing a wedding picture since it's, God bless you, 25th anniversary for Rolling Stone. What do you think of that? And he goes, I love it, but I have one request. I was like, what's that? He goes, can I be the bride? So that's pretty much a home run. This is an extremely stoned Carlos Santana. I actually don't even think he knew his picture was being taken. Or wearing a Bob Marley t-shirt, for that matter. So this is again the use of color, right? So we're out in the middle of these foothills we found in San Francisco. And a mustard field was just perfectly like blooming at that time. And I had scouted it the day before. And we picked this place, and it was just kind of weirdly coincidental that the shirt and the guitar, the Jamaican guitar, everything kind of worked out perfectly for us. So what happens when you're thinking and you're writing down all your ideas and you're thinking, how am I going to illustrate the world's greatest drummer? Oh, he'll have 4 hands. So that was my assistant's hands, and the stylist at the time, this is all for the 25th anniversary, the stylist at the time, Ariane Phillips, who is amazing, and is amazing, she built 2 extra sleeves from the shirt. And so my assistant put it through his arms, through Ringo's arms, which was very uncomfortable. And that's the picture, so it's totally just a gag. This was kind of like my journey into portraiture, where I would start to use 4x5 early on. This is in '92. I'd use 4x5, and it would be a constant, re-entry into kind of a reductive portrait. So this is obviously George Harrison. Funny thing about George Harrison is that amazing moment, we had ukuleles in there for him to play, because I was told he really liked ukuleles, and he was still pissed off about a review in Rolling Stone for Dark Horse, that after he finished the shoot, he walked out with the most expensive ukulele. And I said, hey, George, that's a rental ukulele, it's Martin. And he goes, oh yeah, he goes, Bill Yon Winna. So, very low. This is very low tech here. We were shooting the shot in Tunbridge Wells at Jeff Beck's property, and we saw the sheep walking across the field, and I made his wife come and feed him pretty close to his head. But super low tech. This was one of the first. I started to do Rolling Stone covers pretty early on. Like it's the second year I started working with them as a freelancer, and this was obviously. Lou Reed. And this was for his New York record. So I was talking to Jane from, I think it's NBC or ABC or one of those big networks, but we were talking about photographing these guys in Melbourne. And in Melbourne, I traveled over there to shoot Nirvana right when Nevermind broke out. And I met with the band, and I knew that they wore clothing with writing on it to support these smaller grassroots bands in Seattle. So I didn't meet Kurt the first day. I met Dave and Chris, and I said to Dave, I said, hey, is there any way that you guys can make sure you don't wear T-shirts with writing on it, because it's really going to distract with the kind of the type on the magazine? He was like, oh yeah, I'll pass that on to everybody. And so I said, okay, great. So that was like telling a child, like, don't do something. Don't write on crayon on the wall. That's a bad idea, right? So the next day, they show up at location. Van pulls up. It's just a small little van. Chris gets out. Dave get out, and they're laughing. And I'm going, what's so funny? And then Kurt gets out and it says, corporate magazines still suck, written on his shirt. I felt like an idiot. I was trying to finagle the glasses off or the shirt, change the shirt, nothing worked. I came back after sweating it out on a plane, and the magazine loved it, and they ran it just like that. Fiona Apple. So this was Under the Waves. It's a kind of a line in one of her songs, and I just thought it was very ethereal and very beautiful and poetic the way that, she's saying about this kind of like beautiful quiet underneath the water. And so this was my concept for a cover. And we made a tank, and which her manager was very nervous about because we had big electrical lighting. As she was flying in water, I was like, don't worry about it. She'll, this is her first and last record. So this is the beautiful moment when a band comes up to you and go like, we got an idea. You're like, what's your idea, guys? And it's like, we're Metallica, Skull and Crossbones. I was like, all right, how am I going to make this work? Skull and Crossbones. So I got it. Skull and Crossbones, right? Skull and Crossbones. So I set up a black background, and I made sure that it just was Skull and Crossbones. Metallica. So this was my idea. I was trying to figure out Kid Rock. Now, I grew up in Texas, so I can appreciate a little redneck fine art, right? So I'm thinking if Kid Rock were to make a totem, right, what would the totem be? It wouldn't be a bear, wouldn't be like Bigfoot, right? It would be a very large-breasted woman. This is kind of a groove that I started on where I was shooting more reportage. So I would go on to a set, or I'd go into somebody's home, and I would just sort of shoot loosey-goosey. And this was a moment during the Chronic when Dre and Snoop were taking a break during the making of a video, and I realized why we were shooting in that location. Because Dr. Dre was on house arrest if you look at his left ankle. He couldn't go anywhere. So not everything looks kind of like big production, and when we're working, we're trying to create a little bit of a theater in terms of like the more controlled, contrived pictures. So this shot of Tom Waits came about when I asked Tom to be in my first signature book, which was with Rolling Stone, and the pictures I'd taken with them. And I went to Northern California, and I asked Tom, he invited me, and I went there, and I said, well, what do you want to do? And he said, well, I have an idea. And he said, he asked me what my idea was. He didn't like it. He goes, how about if you guys, meaning my assistant and myself, go dig a grave, and I'll come over. I got a shovel and a wheelbarrow. And I was like, all right, where should we dig a grave? He goes, well, downtown, I live in a small little town in Northern California, there's a graveyard, and I think you guys will be fine. I'm going, are you serious? You want us like go dig it? Yeah, I'll be there around 5. So we go around trying to find somebody to let us dig a grave, and we couldn't find anybody. The whole town was shut down, so we just went over there and dug a grave, and nobody bothered us. And Tom came, and we did this picture. This is there's this kind of like sad, kind of a funny, ironic sadness about Lyle, and he's always kind of this sort of sarcastic, trend in his music. So this is like the guy that just is the last at the party that no one came to. This was a little bit of a bend in terms of I started to work a lot more in the studio and to create sets in the studio. And a friend of mine, Patrick Parkhurst, who is a great set builder, helped me design this kind of honeycomb box that we painted silver, and then we tar and feathered the man that I think people revered and also reviled. So this was Marilyn Manson being tar and feathered. And this is all, most of the stuff is all on camera. There might be a little bit of moving a feather around, but pretty honest. This is the big bling, Nellie. This was for, I'd moved over from shooting for Rolling Stone to going to working for Vanity Fair. And with Vanity Fair, I did kind of a different thing. It was more, God bless you, it was more of a lusher, a little more extravagant experience. And so they always wanted things to be very kind of like high end. And this was our answer to, you know, kind of that time in hip hop where things were very blingy. This was really funny. This moment was pretty authentic. We set up this throne in the middle of Times Square because he was the king of New York, and Puff, who I had met a couple of times and was notoriously difficult on set, showed up at around 12:30 at night in Times Square, and it was really busy and really crazy. And we had a throne set up, and he came in, and first thing he said to me is like, "I don't like the throne." I'm like, "Okay, well, we're going to just have to figure that one out." And eventually, I talked him into liking the throne. So this is around 2:30 in the morning, after he decided he did like the throne. This is a nice little moment with Keith Richards. So this is my studio in New York, and I've always loved the way that he sort of moves, slinks around. It's almost like ballet when you see him on stage. Well, it's kind of drunken ballet. But it's like Baryshnikov with like a six-pack. But it's pretty great when you see him perform and he goes into this mode. So anyway, we shot a series of photographs and then we pasted them together. This was Jack White, and this was in Atlanta. Nashville, and we found, kind of skirted around and found an old sort of Model T truck that we were able to drag to the location that we were at, and we found this the day before. But the whole idea behind it was this kind of decaying moment with this stuff going around him. Anyway, that's his outfit, Jack White. That was recently done. So, right after that, and I want to just see if I can find my notes here. Right after the kind of entree into Rolling Stone around '96, I decided to reach out and figure out a book that I wanted to do. And when I was in Houston growing up, there was a moment experience when I went into a bakery, a Jewish bakery, where we used to get our challah, and I saw a tattoo on one of the guys that was running the bakery, and realized that he was a survivor. But it was still pretty shocking. I mean, you guys, are obviously pretty aware of what's going on with the museum here. But at that time in the '70s, it was pretty shocking to see somebody with a tattoo and think of them as like they had made it through, they had survived. And so I did a book on survivors. So this is a little quote in the book. And Fred Woodward designed the book. I'm going to show you some pictures and tell you a little bit about them. Not so much, but just kind of let you feel the photographs. The survivor did not dwell on death. They rebuild life. This was the lesson that they were teaching. A people must remember, but it cannot live on by making a cult on its woes. The faith of the Jews is not simply remembering the Holocaust. It is the Jewish religion, which before and after the Nazis reasserts the verse in Psalms, I will not die, for I will live. Those who remain after the Holocaust and their children and grandchildren must live all the harder and all the more dissentingly to carry on for everyone of the unfinished lives. So what I just stumbled through that, but basically survivors were difficult because they walked that line of feeling bad for surviving, and then also being inspired to carry on life, right, as a survivor. So they walk that line. And, the people that I met there taught me a lot about, being empathetic and about being, having humility and being thoughtful when I was working. And a lot of these people I met and learned their story the day that I was shooting them because we were working at such a quick pace in order to be able to get the book done. So These arms are during a conference of Greek survivors. And this was a big roundtable when we were listening to all these stories. And 97% of all the Greeks that were put in camps, 97% perished because of either the weather conditions or obviously because of death camps. So there's a group of survivors. Kind of the emotional experience of portraiture, expressing what you want to do to evoke a certain moment. This gentleman, his name is Frederick Turner. The woman before was Elizabeth Koenig. Frederick's story, how it relates photographically, is that he would paint incessantly, every day he would paint these gates. And he always returned to painting these gates. And he showed us many paintings that he did like that. So the gates represented his walking out in the world of freedom, to be a survivor. And so I brought a big piece of plexiglass. And I thought, well, this could be either great or could be terrible, could be corny. But he just went for it, and it really became one of my favorite photographs of the series. This is Bimba Beck. Now, early on when I was showing this book and talking about it, I had some students say to me that they thought I was being somewhat manipulative by presenting people like this. But this is really the way she existed. I mean, we walked into her house, we didn't change anything, and she sat on the bed and started smoking. And so I asked her to stay still for 1 second, and that's one of the images that we got. So in the book, which was kind of my first experience in bookmaking, I worked with the art director from Rolling Stone, Fred Woodward, who's legendary and a really, really wonderful friend. And so he created these words to accompany some of the pieces. So, that was one page, that was the left page, and that was the right page. And I just kind of wanted to show you that. So that was what he took from seeing the photographs for the first time. And then the next picture is the Mingol Project, which was, Dr. Mingol would take twins and experiment on them for, to discovering sort of genetic moments. And this was the portrait I did of these twins who were separated, then brought back in, and then went into the program with Mingol. And this was from the story that I was telling you about with the Bakers, the three brothers. The three brothers were separated, and then they were brought together by their sister, who was having a relationship with one of the Jewish officers within the camps, and was able to bring all the brothers back. But I mean, look at that quote. I mean, that's the most bizarre thing, but that was kind of what they were dealing with, these sort of superpowers, dealing with death and dealing with, these impossible situations. And so their bakery, which is really interesting, is called Three Brothers Bakery, but these are the three brothers, the Juckers. And this is a quote that, I felt really represented the idea of what the project really encompassed, because you would really get to know these survivors and understand why that is that's the mandate. It cannot forget, cannot forgive, and cannot forget. These were two brothers, the Tavern brothers. They were also separated, and one was responsible for saving the other one's life. So that was a Holocaust project. So that was my first experience in creating my own body of work, which was really exciting and pleasant. So then I went back to my day job, and everybody I shot looked like a survivor. It was like, oh, I got to get off this kick. So this was in the middle of shooting all these survivors. I had an opportunity to work with Sean Penn. I was, thought he was one of the great actors at that time. Still, I think he's an amazing actor. and really had wore his scars and his battle wounds appropriately. So this was a very kind of reductive picture of Sean Penn. And so I started to enter back into a more reductive palette in terms of making portraits and really kind of focused on that. Somewhat environmental, sometimes back in the studio. This is during Ice-T's moment in Cop Killer, when he came out with this record, which was heavy metal, and one of the songs was Cop Killer. And so everybody was giving him a hard time about that, obviously, because he's a storyteller and he talks about real scenarios that happen, and it was happening in Los Angeles, and there was all this friction between authority and inner city people, and the riots were happening, and everybody was just speaking their mind, which was really great, except for the record company wanted him to shut up. And so I came up with this idea of just gaffer taping his mouth closed. He liked it. This was a kind of an interesting moment where I went and I shot John Lee Hooker, and first thing he said to me was, when he shook my hand, as he made me feel his hands, he says, "Hands are just like velvet, aren't they?" And I was like, "Yes, they really are just like velvet." So I shot a bunch of pictures of him, and I went home, and I said, I didn't get the picture of his hands. I didn't get that picture. So I called him up and I said, "Hey, the cleaning lady came into the hotel room and exposed all the film. I have to come back and shoot the picture." And he said, "All right, I'll give you 20 minutes. So I went over and set up a white background on his driveway, because he didn't leave his house. And I did this in his driveway. This was for an assignment for Iconoclast. And I had Paul Newman and Robert Redford in the same room together, and we were shooting kind of a more complicated situation. But I just decided I was going to do this one portrait of them, and they both were just bitching me out, "What are you doing? And aren't you supposed to be doing something else?" And I said, "Let me get one portrait." Anyway, after Paul Newman passed away, I sent a portrait to Robert Redford just to let him know that I had this, and he was just so blown away by it. He was just so thankful that we took that picture, got that moment. I always say, to my assistants and to people that I'm working with that are talking about photography, is that, the picture you're going to most regret is the picture you don't take. So you always have to trust yourself, no matter how embarrassing it is that, your subject's going to just refuse. If you walk away and you don't get that picture, that's the one you're going to regret. So I try to kind of live by that philosophy. This is not an old English woman. This is actually Mick Jagger at 49. No, this is the first time I had a chance to photograph the Stones. And it was wonderful. It was amazing. They flew me on the Concorde for a meeting to London, and then I had to come back and do the day after, and I had to set up these sets. It was very rushed, crazy. Mick and Keith were, in their usual night, not talking to each other. And so, you can tell they're not talking to each other. It's like, "Don't speak to me." So I've got the group downstairs and no Keith, right? So I go up and there's Keith, listening to their new record, up 2 floors up in a small little space in the studio. And I'm going "Pardon me, Keith, the guys are downstairs waiting for you," and I can tell they're getting upset. And I said, do you mind coming downstairs? He goes, "Mark, really?" He says, "I've been with these guys for 30 years and they're boring." Can't argue with that. So little Richard, I just photographed him last year, would not take off his sunglasses. Said no. And I said, "Let me just do one picture digitally, and I'll show it to you. And if you don't like it, then we won't use that." So I put on my Hasselblad, non-digital Hasselblad, and I shot one frame and kind of distracted him. I did a couple more photographs of him, and this is the one picture I got on my Hasselblad. Still in a reductive, simple portraiture. This was in an an old loft I used to live in Soho in New York. And I always loved this because his manager, right, Jeff Kramer, said to me, Bob's going to come at 5. He'll stay as long as you want, within reason. Whatever you do, don't shake his hand. Got it. I'm, it's Bob Dylan. I'm not going to shake his hand. Fine. So elevator comes up at 5, promptly at 5, and there's Bob Dylan. Walks up and goes, how you doing? They always get you that way. So this is Johnny Cash. This is in a hotel room in Vegas. We'd actually just shot the morning before out in the desert, which was really funny. It was like I was trying to talk him to go out to the desert, and he said, son, I can't go to the desert. My jaw will light up, it will heat up like a pistol. And then I just kind of sat there and sulked for a little bit, and he looked, all right, boy, I'll go out there, but it has to be at 7 o'clock in the morning. So the next day, after we did that picture, he came to the hotel room because I had this idea of shooting his first second article of him with his guitar behind his back because I saw him perform, and that's what he did. So I used what I saw at the performance as what I think became an iconic photograph of him, which was the man in black. This is a little interpretive dance by Tom Waits. Tom's great because Tom never really wants, what you want is you want a willing subject. And musicians are very complicated because they get into their skin and they don't want to change. So you really have to depend on the theater of somebody if you want it to be bigger than just a portrait. So this was I had worked with George Hurrell just one time before he passed away as an assistant. And so I was always interested in that kind of Hollywood lighting. So this is using more kind of traditional movie lights, Fresnels, in a 4x5. This moment happened. We were in Indianapolis, and we had an hour with Jerry Garcia. The rule with Jerry, you had to have 2 6-packs of root beer and 3 packs of Marlboros and a guitar. And then he would stay around for 59 minutes. So I had just started using a 6x7 Pentax and was really getting interested in what the results were of just a very loose camera, Tri-X always. And my lens at that time broke, so it didn't stop down. However, I figured out what my exposure was with a Polaroid rather than with a meter, so I just judged it by the Polaroid. And what happened was, by having that happy accident, I started shooting everything wide open after that, and really became kind of a constant for a couple of years with me. So this is at 2:08 in the middle of the day, which was nutty. And you can see how everything has a 3-dimensional quality because it just goes out of focus. Patti Smith, this was with in my studio, and she walked in with her boots around her shoulder and her hat on and her coat on. And I said, don't change, walk over to the background, let me just shoot you just like that. And that was one of the first pictures we did. I always find that the moment when somebody walks into the studio and the moment when somebody leaves can actually be your best moments in taking their picture because they're not thinking about it. They are who they are. Susan Sarandon, again, kind of illustrating the simple portrait. This is recent. This is of Jeff Bridges. Crazy Heart was the movie he was promoting, and I did crazy hair. This was an in-between moment. We were shooting an 8x10 Polaroid. I started working with large format and doing portraits. And, Bruce he's great, but it felt a little stiff, and I shot a Polaroid, and an 8x10 Polaroid, and he was totally, relaxed and not thinking about it because he thought it was a Polaroid. But I just loved what we got, so we made a scan of the Polaroid and used this. So now we go, I call this kind of series in cinema. These are more when you go back and you photograph people over time, right? So Brad, I worked with early on in his career. He always loves an event. Like he always wants to make it into something special. So whenever I would work with Brad in the early days, it was a 2-day shoot. This was in Mexico, in Mexicali, right over the border. And this is kind of late in the afternoon and listening to Neil Young and smoking a joint. I wasn't. Make that clear. He was. And this was on a weird deserted salt flat somewhere in Mexicali, we found. This is during Fight Club. And he decided, it was his idea, he wanted to wear a dress. I'm in. Sounds good. And obviously smoke a couple cigarettes. This is so I didn't work with him for about a dozen years. And then this is the most recent shoot that we did up in Humboldt County in California, up in Northern California. And this was his customized bike that we shot. So we did a series of these pictures in Humboldt up in the Redwood Forest, which is magnificent. If you guys have ever been there or not, you should go. John Malkovich. So again, working with your artists and kind of creating a simple little story, cinematic little moment. Peter Dinklage. And I worked with Peter a couple of times, so I knew that he was sort of game to do whatever. And he kind of loved this little moment with him. Mr. Tarantino in his screening room. This was for GQ. When you're working with magazines, there sometimes is a formula you have to follow, whether it's using fashion or illustrating a story that they want to tell. So it's not always just like going and doing a portrait, even though I try to have those moments. But this is in his screening room. This is Lindsay before she decided not to take a cab. No, anyway. So this is early Lindsay Lohan for Vanity Fair. This is Leonardo at 15. This is what he wore in his hair at the time. And that was really his muscle, sort of. And that was him a couple years ago when we worked with GQ. I always like the kind of painterly quality of these photographs. I find them to be, really challenging to create, these stories and try to do them really kind of perfect, like the right styling and the right ideas and the right lights and the right location. And there's another side to working with artists, actors and talent, and working with artists, with real visual artists. And this is Rim Koolhaas. And we had him for a couple of hours. I think we were in Paris. And we'd done a bunch of different portraits. And then I saw this, he was making a note, and I saw this light and this shadow come across the window. And I just had him act as if he was drawing on the window. This was in Tom Wolfe's office. Great writer, great man. Knows how to wear a suit. This was pretty interesting. Cindy Sherman does not allow people to really photograph her that much. I mean, there have been portraits of her, and there's probably more than I think. But I like to think that I was somewhat special. Anyway, this is in her studio, and what was wonderful about doing Cindy's portrait was that I really got to learn about her process of working a little bit and how she does it. Very scaled back, usually by herself, and she has these big containers and closets full of, appendages and all kinds of weird noses, and she had a whole drawer of breasts to pick from. So that's a pair I had. Oh, sorry. Microphone. And so we did a little mock photo shoot that she would do using her cameras and stuff. Ed Ruscha. This is for Loma Vogue. So Loma Vogue is always about, the kind of eccentric, over-the-top fashion. So this fashion director created this look for Ed Ruscha, which is pretty atypical of Ed Ruscha, is a laid-back artist. Anyway, so I love these sort of the mad priest, wizard, whatever. You know who that is? I just shot this. This is Robert Frank. And this is his. We just got to sign this with Rolling Stone. This hadn't been published yet, but I got invited to go shoot Robert Frank, which was kind of a thrill. And we kind of didn't touch anything, obviously. But I thought this was a kind of a big home run for me, because we didn't really do anything but just sort of find the moment with him. And it was over pretty quick, too. You can't see it, but underneath his bed were just boxes and boxes of prints. So this is the series. This is Drew Barrymore, who I loved working with when I first worked for her. Check out the boxer in the background. What a great view he's got. The Bad Alice. It was fun. So when I was a kid, my ideas come from memory, and whatever I see, whatever I can think of, and just kind of turning things inside out sometimes, writing down a list of things. I thought about, hey, what was the one thing missing in Boy Scouts? Wasn't it the hot scout leader that you tied up? Which brings me into comedy. So one of the areas that I was kind of pushed into pretty quickly was shooting comedians, which I actually really like, except for comedians typically think they're funnier than obviously anybody else. And they always attach, the thing that really pissed me off was that they'd always attach a line to an idea. You say, okay, how about this for an idea? They're like, oh yeah. And below it, I'll be holding a sign that says, that's what she said. You're like, no. Anyway, so this is more of just an environmental picture. This is where Jay Leno goes every week and does stand-up in, I believe it's near Venice in California. And we found an old tape of Johnny Carson and popped it in there. So. This is Carl Reiner and Mel Brooks. This was for Vanity Fair. I worked on this project with Judd Apatow, and we did a bunch of comedians. What I love about these guys is that every night they both are, widowers, and what they do every night is they get together and watch a movie and eat a chicken. And they'll tell you that. You have to leave. We're going to eat a chicken. So I get a call from Vanity Fair. It says, hey, we want you to team up and do a really great picture of Will Ferrell. I'm like, all right. This is Matt LeBeau is his manager. Give him a call. So I knew Matt. I called Matt, and he goes, hey, Will and I have an idea. And I said, well, what's that? And he goes, how about Will giving birth to a chimp? And I said, what do you think of the doctors are also chimps or ape-like? He goes, perfect. The late Robin Williams. This was a moment where I had built this kind of weird little corner, sort of a Pennish, Magritte-ish, I don't know, whatever I was going, somewhere like that. And Robin, we had him for a half day one day and a half day the following, it was like a Friday and then a Monday. And we did the cover shoot, and then I showed him the corner. I said, well, we're going to do that on Monday. And he goes, and he took his shoes, and he put his knees on them. And he was like, oh, yeah, like me, like Toulouse-Lautrec. This was kind of a random moment, which it's turned into a good picture for me, is we had a chimp right during the, Forrest Gump days. I was trying to relate, like, this guy was sort of an idiot savant and was really kind of, very basic, but at the same time, sort of this expanded intelligence. And we had a chimp there, and we were trying to figure out what to do with the chimp. I just thought it'd be fun to work with a chimp. And the chimp started to touch Tom on his face, and it just, all of a sudden Tom goes, oh, these are my hands, and we kind of created that photograph. This is Patrick Stewart. This is a guy you don't think is funny, right? So I had this shaving cream. This was my idea, and I applied it on his face, which he was very lovely and warm to do. I like that. I got a little laugh off that. It makes me feel good. Jerry Seinfeld. So, did you guys know that Seinfeld was based, actually, the characters on The Wizard of Oz? That's at least that's what Jerry told me. The funny thing about this was everything was really developed, like big sets. Colleen Atwood, who does all Tim Burton's movies, did the costuming for it, and Jerry was sick, very sick that day, and we had a little smoke machine going through the back of the suit and through the little funnel on his head. And it stopped working. And it took us about 10 minutes to fix. Like my special effects dude, who was not very special effects, couldn't get it to work. So Jerry motions for me to come over, and he has laryngitis. He goes like, you think it was really this difficult 50 years ago? So this is a little naughty, so forgive me. So this is kind of worked out the story with, this is recent, with Julie Louis-Dreyfus, right? So Julie Louis-Dreyfus goes to this kind of crazy clown party where she kind of finds this one clown, and she's very attracted to him. They end up in a drunken stupor going back to her room at the convention center. I'm inventing this up as I go along. Make love. Lo and behold, it's a baby clown. And so this is kind of my exploration a little bit in movement and dance. And not too much I have to say about this. Anyway, this is Misha Baryshnikov. And this is where my assistant accidentally clicked my lens twice on a 4x5. And I was so pissed because I really thought I had two different exposures that were really great. And I was like, oh, fuck, you just double exposed my film. And then, of course, I get the film, and I'm like, that's the best thing that ever happened, man. You're the greatest. You're the greatest assistant I've ever had. But that was a really lucky accident. So through dance, I got a chance to work with Merce Cunningham and his company. And on his 90th year on Earth, on the planet, I asked him to come over to my studio, and we did 8x10 hand ballet. And we were speaking today about how, the beautiful articulation and artistic movement of somebody, even if they can't, he was in a wheelchair, even if he can't move, still came through with the gracefulness of his hands. And then 3 months later, he passed, but this is a little moment I had with Merce. And then that's Merce and Misha in my studio. Misty Copeland from the ABT, my studio. And a new dancer, Calvin Harris, from, I believe, the ABT as well. One of the, what's really funny is I travel a lot. Sometimes I end up in places where there's all these different interesting things happening around me, but I'm just on an assignment. We were going to shoot Bunny Whaler in Jamaica. And Bunny became very superstitious and decided he didn't want to be photographed, which led me to like a 4-day back and forth on the phone trying to get him to acquiesce and let me photograph him. And it never happened, but I was in Jamaica, so I took my 4x5 out and I put a white background and I photographed Rastas. So, 9/11 was a moment in New York where, it felt like you were drugged. You didn't know whether you should go out and take a picture or whether you should just kind of curl up on the sofa and just be, quiet, like everybody felt. And a buddy of mine who's a journalist was, and I felt like the energy of going out and wanting to take pictures. And my buddy, Ed Keating, worked for the Times, and he was covering downtown. And he had a pass to go back and forth into Ground Zero, which was, basically shut down and a crime zone. And he got me access as a construction worker to go down with him one day. And I went and I don't know if you ever saw the picture that he did, which is a very famous picture that ran the Times of the teacups. And he did a little still life of that. And it was kind of the same day, and I did this sort of bigger picture of our guy that was escorting us through the building that was adjacent to Ground Zero. I don't even remember taking this picture. I did this with a little point and shoot. But this was 8 days after 9/11, after the planes hit the towers. I always found this to be such an evocative kind of fence from the skeleton from the World Trade Center. These two gentlemen were the last to be ushered out as they were searching for their battalion. It's a crew chief and a captain looking for the last of their truck, and I just said, "Could I just take a quick portrait of you?" And they let me. And then after that day, everything was shut down. No one was allowed back in there. This is kind of a big moment for me, photographing President Obama. And I'd photographed him once before, but this was the first time as president. And I'd had this picture in my mind, right? Like I knew that I wanted to do kind of a diptych of front and a back. And, so imagine you've got like all of his staff, Rolling Stone writer, editor-in-chief is there, Jan Winter. And I've done the cover portrait, which was kind of walking down the corridor in the Rose Garden. And I said, President Obama, I want to do a picture of you, a diptych of your front and your back. And he goes, kind of thought, he goes, "Is that going to make my ears look big?" I don't think so. I don't think your ears are big. Anyway, so that's a portrait that I wanted to take, but I had to think about it before I took it. It wasn't random. It was very, very well thought out picture. This is a 4x5 I shot of Carter, and he was just cantankerous that day, just not friendly. But I kind of loved when he was just sitting there and just like had an off moment. I love the hand. I love the kind of the power of the grip of him, like this kind of like man that's just holding on. Kind of the kindness that these eyes have experienced. He's just was the most gentle soul I'd ever experienced. We were shooting in a remote town in South Africa, And it was at a hotel. And when Mandela was brought up to us, I was shooting for Amphar. And when Mandela was brought up to us to photograph, the entire hotel was outside. Every worker was outside crying. And he just was like this, he was just their spiritual, guide. This is a really nice breakthrough moment for me. We got a chance to shoot the Dalai Lama and then photograph the Dalai Lama. And the Dalai Lama always wears those ridiculous glasses and a big watch. So I was told by thousands of monks, do not ask the Dalai Lama to take off his glasses or take his watch off. And so I had a portrait I wanted to do. I'd shot all the other stuff I needed to do, and I said, okay, I want to do a quick 4x5. And I said, do you mind taking off your glasses and your watch? The monks just looked at me and took them off. And this was just a couple of frames we shot, but I just loved the kind of the beautiful blackness, the marble of his eyes. It's Hillary. That was in India. And just a quick little moment with her. This is the wonderful Malala. So I photographed her for Time magazine last year, and this was the first photograph that was done after she had been shot. Am I blocking anybody over there? I'm sorry if I am. So the journey kind of goes into my interest in working outside of, my comfort zone. So I've been working in the fashion world a little bit and creating stories through clothing. So which is a really nice, different experience where you work with great models and you kind of tell them what the story is and have them work it out. So that was for Italian Vogue. This was Charlize for Elle magazine. It's Kerry Washington for Italian Vogue. Kind of a Diana Ross story. Beautiful, great stylist, great hair and makeup. The whole thing is, very beautifully orchestrated with support. Another photograph from Italian Vogue I did with Ariane Phillips, same person that worked with me in the early days with Fleetwood Mac. And this is much, much more recent. And this was for a story on the fashion of Cavalli. Another story I did with Ariane at the theater, the Geary Theater in a Disney Theater in LA. It was a red story we worked on. A lot of times with a magazine like Italian Vogue or some of the other Harper's Bazaar will use actresses as models, which is not that easy because they typically don't move the same way. But anyway, this was Emma Watson, and this was for Italian Vogue, and this was couture. So the way couture works is that, you go and you set up your picture, and then the clothes, the designers come up with the couture, they send out the couture outfits, and you have an hour to shoot them, and then they leave and they go to the next photographer. So I think this was Galliano. It's for German Vogue, a story on Mickey Mouse. This was a story we did of, kind of 1920s burlesque in France, and this was shot in a French theater in Paris. And that's Diane Kruger. And Kristen, this was for Italian Vogue. So, just a quick little story about making covers. So you make a cover, right? You take a picture, and then you always have to have the experience of where the type goes, right? So, as a cover photographer, that's where I've gotten a lot of strength in being able to do that. This is what happens when you leave the band before the Rolling Stone cover comes out. He actually got fired, and the band was mad at me for a long time for not putting him in there. It wasn't my decision, it was the art direction. But anyway, they took him out. Brad. And then this was a photograph I did from a session that was in conjunction with In Utero. And I did a portrait of Kurt. And it was the Polaroid negative that was the picture that, again, it was like that off moment that he wasn't really thinking about it. But there was this really interesting quality about it. He was looking at the camera. He seemed, maybe it was just dazing out, but to me it seemed like there was this melancholy, forlorn look in his eye. This kind of sadness. And everybody had thought he was like clean and happy and married and kid and blah, blah, blah. And then 2 months later, he passed away. He shot himself, and this was the memorial issue. So I'm going to kind of run through this because we're running out a little bit of time. But anyway, this is a book I did in the top of my building. I found this beautiful skylight from taking out the elevator shaft, and we had to put in a stairwell because of the egress and blah, 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 permitting things. But we built a kind of a little studio up there, and I created a little theater within these 4 walls, very small little space, and we shot a series of portraits in there. That was the previous moment was me shooting Bruce, and then this was the image. This is an amazing performer by the name of Bill Irwin. And we had photographed him for probably 2 hours, and this was one of the last pictures we did. Just a quick, I picked up my 2 1/4, and he said, okay, let me try something. And he made this incredible physical U shape, which is not easy. Michael and I have worked together for many years, and when I was telling him about the project, I said I'd really love to photograph you and Ali, for the simple reason that they both were fighters in their disease. And so we made Ali the coach and Michael the boxer, which was the comedy. Julia, the great Robert Wilson. Amazing artist, amazing playwright. This woman is Azar Nafasi, who wrote the book Reading Lolita in Tehran. And this was a moment where the Stairwell series was really about bringing mainstream and kind of peripheral characters together into one book and into one theater, really. So every time we would bring somebody in, those walls would change, and they would make their own story. But it was very reductive and very kind of quiet. And then I also started to learn a little bit about the platinum palladium process, and this is Richard Serra, which will lead to the final selection of work. Willie Nelson, Philip Seymour Hoffman, again, Cindy Sherman. Now, you got to love this guy, Peter Beard. I said, why don't you come? We'll put a couple paintings up, and we'll kind of give this illusion that, we'll bring a girl in, that you're kind of working with this model. And he goes, oh, no, I got you covered. I'll just bring some of my friends. Sure enough, doorbell rings. There's like 4 beautiful women. Matthew Barney, great artist. This was a mask that was used in Cremaster, one of his movies. And my friend did the prosthetic on it. And so I talked to Matthew about doing the shot. And Gabe also helped me to seal that deal. And we took the mask and we cut it in half. And then he did a beautiful job of seaming it together. But that's all on camera. Woody Allen. So this is the last piece of work I'm going to show you. This is a real departure for me, where I took my own interpretation of very classic photographic themes, which is landscape, still life, and nudes. And loosely used themes, and started with the process, which was a platinum palladium print, and more importantly, a 30 by 40 platinum palladium print. So we're making oversized negatives and we're making contact prints onto hand-painted paper that we made at the studio. So this was a snowstorm in New York, but this was at Coney Island. So it really has this beautiful kind of almost Rothko experience. That was actually the same day in the morning at the boathouse in Central Park and dealing with like an abstraction. So taking like what would be a kind of typical angle of whatever you were to see, like reality, and then moving my camera around and finding something that was really about abstraction and design and negative and positive space. I was on a job shooting Tiger Woods mistresses. Swear to God. I was up there photographing a mistress for the story for Vanity Fair, and it was the most beautiful, snowy, foggy day, which was perfect for what I was doing in terms of landscapes. And I had my 4x5 there, and so I just shot it out the window, and I made that photograph. I've always really loved the kind of the texture of the light drops on the window. And this was a job we were doing where we had a couple of props. We had a hairless cat, and we had some cars. Seriously, we had cars. And I was shooting Gary Oldman, who didn't want to be holding a hairless cat. He thought that was too weird. I was like, have you seen your past pictures? But anyway, so I just used him for myself and created this little still life. And I consider this to be a still life. Nude. So I wasn't really going to do portraits, but we started to kind of connect a little bit in terms of body modification. And I really found the idea that we modify the way that we look with something artificial and create these illusions was really interesting, especially when they were to go to such an extreme. That was another still life. That was just a found object on a shoot that I was shooting in Paris. That was in Brazil. But it's kind of a drag because if you were to see the prints are beautiful and, you know, kind of a different experience than seeing them on a screen, but just to kind of give you a little bit. This was back in Central Park. This was in the springtime and just right when everything was budding. And it almost feels like, you know, when you look at it close up, it's kind of like a daguerreotype or a landscape from Photo Succession even. So it was, and then I went back and shot the same scene in the wintertime. That's, you know, obviously Merce Cunningham's hands again. This is one of the first pictures, landscapes I took, which the rule of thumb was, and I'll read you a little quote by Minor White. The rule of thumb was, when you approach something to photograph it, first be still with yourself until the object of your intention affirms your presence. Then don't leave until you have captured its essence, and that's Minor White. So that to me really encapsulated my thinking about going out and taking a picture or making a picture, not creating a picture, but allowing that picture to come to me. And so this photograph was done on New Year's Eve. I was waiting for a friend to come by and kind of on my own in New York. Everybody else was gone out of town. I was just nice, quiet, little afternoon. And as the sun went down, this fog rolled in, and I live right on the water on the Hudson in the West Village. And these piers just looked like these beautiful, you know, time lost in New York City. And I went down with my 4x5 and I started to take, you know, compose and take this picture by myself. And as I was standing there, it was just at that little last moment of light tail end of it, and I was just on the edge, like a 30-second exposure of it just being at the end. I looked back, and there's like 25 people standing behind me watching what I'm doing and just like really like enjoying this like little moment. It was warm. It was like it was today. And I realized that if I'm enjoying it, then other people must be enjoying it too, because as a photographer, your sight and your vision is heightened, right? So, you know, that's when I started to really explore the idea of like not hesitating to go out and take a picture. This photograph means a lot to me because I had just left Houston. My father had been in the hospital and had been very sick in ICU, and he was supposed to die. And he didn't. He kept on holding on. So my mom finally said, look, you know, my brothers and my sister and I, you guys got to go do your thing, come back tomorrow, whatever. And I had a job in LA, so I traveled to Los Angeles, and I was shooting Billy Bob Thornton, which was weird anyway, just like I'm shooting Billy Bob Thornton, my father's sick. And I saw this in this warehouse, I saw this decayed bird, and I just thought, you know, this kind of represents something to me, I'm not sure. And then 12 hours later, my father passed, but I always feel like that was sort of this sort of preemptive moment of understanding death. It was a kind of a still life we made at the studio. Beautiful platinum print. And this guy, it's a little out of sequence, but this guy was, what's his name, Brian? George, something like that? Harold? It was like, I'm at a Jane's Addiction concert, right? I'm like walking around, getting ready for the show, excited. And I see this sea of people. It was like the Red Sea parting, right? Like all these people are like, whoa. And I see this guy walking through, and he's got metal hanging off his face. I mean, it's like a lot of metal. And I kind of watched him, and then he went into the bathroom, and people were still kind of like, ooh, you know, just not happy with him. And he walked out, and I said, hi, I gave my card. I said, hi, I'm Mark Seliger. I'm a photographer. I just think you look amazing. I would love to take your picture. And I didn't know what I was going to get. And he was like, well, I'm George. Yeah, I could use a headshot. Guy came over the next day. Got him a headshot. Anyway, that's it. Thank you. Before I forget, I just wanted to let you guys ask a couple questions in 1 second, but I just wanted to thank you guys for coming, first of all. Wonderful audience and being patient. Also, I have to do this before I'll be quick. ASMP Director-elect Tom Kennedy. Tom, where are you? There's Tom Kennedy. The DC chapter prez, David Weigel. David is responsible for arranging to have the studio come out here. Again, Brian, thank you so much for incredible support. The Smithsonian Art Museum, thank you. And Betsy Bryn, the museum director, the American University, thank you very much, too. And last but not least, Theo Adamstein from FotoWeekDC. So I think we have a few minutes, right, to a couple questions, no? You guys have any big epiphanies I can help you with? Yes, this young lady over here in the back row.
What has digital allowed you to do that film didn't allow you to do?
One more time.
Has digital allowed you to do that film didn't allow you to do?
Well, digital, I mean, if you will, I mean, this is one of the questions that we all ask. Like, you know, technology kind of interrupts us a little bit from like what we're used to, right? It's like, you know, that comfort level sometimes can be, especially if you like the mechanical aspect and the tactile aspect. But I think digital, if it's thought of as like a parallel, a sister, it's like a paintbrush, right? So what I like about digital is that I can still use my vocabulary as a photographer with the analog experience, but with digital I can kind of just, it's almost like the recording industry. You can put in it, and you can process it the way you want to, but it takes me less time to get there usually than it did with film. However, in saying that, I think in the process of making the picture, you need to remove yourself from always looking at the screen. Like a screen should be, checking exposure, but the minute that you lose that impact of being, involved with your subject, to having that relationship between your subject and yourself, then it gets tricky. And then also, people look at pictures and they get self-conscious, and we really try to not use a screen always, inside of the subject.
If you could give one piece of advice to a young photographer about bringing your ideas to life, like the crazy things you think of that you really would want to photograph, what would it be?
Well, I think that process is always the most important in the process of thinking and the process of creating, right? It's how you visualize something. I'm not the best person to really take it in a spontaneous place, because I usually work my pictures out before I take them. And then everything else is gravy. So what I think is important for somebody who's really trying to develop the idea of being more conceptual is to write everything down that you can about your idea. Everything from if you flip it over or if you look at it one way. And then just start to eliminate till you find out 2 or 3 ideas that you have that you're excited about. And then just narrow it down to that. And then don't deviate from that unless the subject takes you down that road.
So when you are shooting portraits, when do you decide to enlist the use of hair and makeup person? When do you think that would actually detract from the subject you're trying to portray?
Well, hair and support can be good or can be bad. It can, I always try to walk that line where, if it's a portrait, not to change things too much. Sometimes somebody will walk in and like the Patti Smith picture, I think we had a groomer there, but when she walked in, there was no reason to touch a thing. She looked amazing. And so hair and makeup and styling can add to it, but I think you have to be very, very careful of it. Use it respectfully. But in a fashion story, it's the exact opposite. You start it with hair and makeup. Like that creates your idea. Somebody might walk in and look great, and you can kind of use it, but that's usually not the case, because those are not the portraits that's not the kind of work you're going to do as a fashion photographer. You're going to create a story. You're going to create a character.
Thank you.
Oh, there must be one more question.
Right here.
Oh, sorry.
I was wondering, although there's many talented photographers, what do you think has made you unique in the fact that you have been more successful than others?
Just my good looks.
Besides that.
Charm. I'm hard on myself. I work every single day on, my job, and I try to, each time I get an assignment, I try to make the best out of that assignment that I possibly can. So, it is, it's a little bit bold to say like your last job is, your next job is your last job, but, you really have to treat, a career as a long-term experience and be respectful of that as you move forward. So you always are kind of I'm always recreating myself. I'm always trying to figure out like, I have my tricks and tools and things I go back to, but, the minute that I start to feel too comfortable, I try to go into an area where I'm less comfortable. I mean, fashion, for instance, like when we started doing fashion, people were going like, you're never going to do this. And I'm not that great at it, but I enjoy the experience of being able to do something like that. Same with portraiture. You know, portraiture is one of those experiences where it's endless. I mean, you can change a format of a camera, or you can change an idea, or you can go from a lighting situation to a non-lighting situation, and it's always going to be different. And I think you just have to really challenge yourself in order to be able to do it. And, you know, I've had a 30-year career by, you know, just basically being miserable. Yes, ma'am. Yes. Oh, this guy? Oh, that was an interest. Well, I knew that he was obviously like going to be a willing player in the subject. What I did was I mean, not very much. I set up this. That's an 8x10. So I knew that detail, I treated it like an object, right? Because I didn't want it to be about a portrait. I didn't want it to be portraits in this book. I wanted it to be an object. So I thought of it like something you'd look at, like the way that you would view a beautiful vase. So I lit it lit him like an object, and I kind of watched his body movement, and I had him just kind of like shrink his body down to where the whole thing felt like, you know, almost like a vessel. And then I think the eyes just became like this one more element to the jewelry. So that's all we did. It's just, it was very, oh, he brought some girl too that we had to photograph him with. I was like, yeah, this is my girlfriend. She's, you know, she doesn't drink anymore. I had to hear that from him. Got it. It's going to be the couple portrait. But, you know, we got, and what's really beautiful is that when we turned it into a platinum, it really, like the impact of it in a big platinum, it really became like this object for us. So that was the prep I did for it. It was very minimal. And, you know, I like working that way sometimes too. I like big, fun pictures too, but yeah. Oh, no, this is in my studio. Yeah, I lit this in my studio, and then he came to my studio, yeah.
When do you see your work evolving? What do you want to shoot now?
God, if only we could talk. Yeah, how do I see my work evolving? Well, we're actually, I can't really talk about my latest project, but we're working on a new body work in New York, but it's more documentary. It's a part of New York that is vanishing in their portraits, and it's all more or less street work. So, and I'm shooting everything on square, so it's a specific look, and we're about. I can't say anything about it yet because it's sort of sworn to secrecy, but it's pertinent to what's happening in the world today in terms of sexuality and life and cities and urban, and it just kind of like has a really relevant feeling to me. So we're working on that, and then commercially, I mean, it's interesting. I think it's the best time I've ever had. It's like a lovely mix of portraits and fashion and comedy, and you know, I think it's a good time to be able to wear a couple of different hats, you know. It's like, it's hard to do just one thing and have people keep calling you back. And, you know, I think that photography can be a young man's game, but I think it can also be about a long-time career. And I think that you guys, you know, how many people are out there are photographers, you know. So it's a good, you know, we're all in the same world, right? So the way that we should think about, you know, the journey is just being excited, right? So that's sort of where we're at. Yes, sir.
Who would you most like to take your portrait?
Oh, nobody. Nobody taking my portrait. Not even my mama. Sorry, Mom. No pictures.
How do you deal with nerves? I mean, I feel like all of us are nervous when we go into somewhere our clients, so you're photographing something that's online, working for Fuse magazine.
I just vomit. No, you know, I think you have to find a way to stay calm, right? Because there's never been a shoot in the last, 3 decades where I haven't had to make a negotiation in some respect. It's almost 99.9% of the time. And I think it's really about the way that you communicate that, right? Like our job as a photographer, if we're doing portraits, is to be able to communicate what we want. And so having a good, a way to articulate what your idea is. I always think it's really wonderful to study directors because directors really know how to communicate what they need from their actors, and our job is not dissimilar from that, So, I mean, I do a little bit of work on myself to try to just calm down before a shoot, and take a few minutes just to kind of just go into a zone. But I also try to be prepared. Being a little overly prepared is never a bad thing.
We have some questions over on the side.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, not this gentleman. No. Okay.
You've talked about how carefully you plan your portraits.
Mm-hmm.
What about the framing? Some of these shots, the head's centered, some it's off. Sometimes the head's not entirely in the frame.
Yeah.
Sometimes the hair is not entirely in the frame. How do
Yeah.
you go about that?
Well, I mean, I'm a big fan and have been for since school of like that kind of like off moment in framing, and Strabinsky, Penn, Avedon, Diane Arbus even. I mean, I kind of loved when things are not, just perfectly framed. And, I think about my teacher, James Newberry, was really about always interpreting a photograph from 4 sides, right? So you had your foreground, your background, and then you had your 4 aspects to the frame. And so I just make very subtle movements when I'm working to kind of find a composition that maybe feels a little bit uncomfortable or brings in some tension, but it can be the simplest photograph. And I think even that, decisive, visual experience can change the way a picture looks. So I just kind of try to fish around until I find something that feels like I'm on track, and maybe it's like a quick little turn of the head, or it's dropping a camera a little lower or raising it. And the simple portrait can change dramatically.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi. First, I have
Hi.
to say that Listen, amazing book.
Oh, thank you.
Absolutely amazing.
Thank you so much.
So I have a couple questions. One, well, you kind of answered the first one. The assistant, you said the double exposure.
Mm-hmm.
The assistant clicked it twice. I was just wondering how you feel about, like, is that your photo or is it his? Just wait. Second question.
Well, I hope it was my fault.
How do you feel about them cutting one of the peppers out of your photo? I mean, like, as a photographer.
Well, it was a time when it didn't really matter what I said. It was really an editorial decision, and I learned about it, kind of in the final stages, and it was in '92, so I was pretty new to the magazine, so I didn't really know I could say too much, and I didn't show that. I didn't really feel that great about it because I knew they were going to be upset, but I mean, it's not my magazine, I'm a hired gun, and.
So you had no real say in.
Yeah, I could have fought it, but it would have gone nowhere because it was more of a editorial decision, and he had just gotten fired. In terms of my assistant, in the process of taking a 4x5 when you're working with an artist, my relationship with them is constant. Like, I'm always watching them, I'm talking to them, I'm doing stuff. So my assistants, what they do is that with a 4x5, there's somebody that's cocking the camera and there's somebody loading a camera. And I'm directing my subject. So if that synchronicity is off and somebody doesn't put back the slide, and then that communication drops and he double exposes, it's very easy to do. It's like he cocked the camera and the guy had the slide out. So that's what happened. So, I mean, it was a great accident. And actually, it led to a series of double exposures. So, I mean, was I mad for a second? But fine.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir. Well, I think it's an emotional experience. I think when you look at something and, I mean, like I go back to that picture of Obama. Like there's a lot of importance on recognizability, right? Like when you love somebody, you're a fan or whatever. But for me, it's all about that little turn and that little twist or that little sense of emotion. I mean, photographing the Holocaust survivors, like, that was just like rich in tears and in faces and, storytelling. And then with Obama, it was just that definitive, beautiful silhouette of, this guy that we've gotten to know from many different angles. And that was just one that was sort of unexpected. And it was so formal that it really made a lot of sense. And the first portrait that really made sense to me was the Arnold Newman picture of Strabinsky, which we were looking at that picture earlier on, the first one of Lowell, the gentleman on the car, the cowboy in the car. That was my early attempt to kind of create an Arnold Newman photograph. But I always loved, that experience of the way that somebody cleverly composes a photograph to where it either mimics an idea or there's some relationship to surrounding. I don't know, it's just a portrait evokes an emotional response or a smile or just some kind of relationship to the viewer. And, if we're going to geek out a little bit, I mean, there's nothing like a beautiful print, and that with a dynamic composition and emotional experience and a beautiful print, it's just win-win. So.
If we could take the last two questions on the other side of the auditorium, and then for any other questions, you can follow us into the lobby where Mark will be signing books.
Yes, ma'am.
What do you think is the most important element in your photographs and why?
Focus. No. Sorry. I think myself. I think always considering myself within the experience of taking a picture and being true to me is the way I feel about my photography. Trying to be, in some sense, original, not relying on a lot of, images that I've seen before. Sometimes you can use an homage, but I've gotten away from studying pictures before I go and I do a picture in terms of all the, bells and whistles. I try to remove myself a little bit from that.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you.
This is more of a technical question. I was just wondering, do you have a process? Do you shoot always with a tripod or 85 millimeter lens?
That is just kind of like the opposite of the way I work. I mean, I have, a room of just like little weird tricks, and it's like sometimes you're hungry for Chinese food, and sometimes you just, you want to just jump into, a bagel and lox. And that's the way I kind of do it. It's just like I have no idea where it's going to go until, I have the idea down, and then it takes a life of its own. I mean, we use continuous lights, we used daylight, we used strobes, we used large format, we used digital, we used pinhole, tripods, no tripod. I mean, the minute that I feel too comfortable with things feeling too still, I'll walk around with, a 35 until I find a composition. One trick I found that you guys you might find useful is, how all cameras now have motion, right? So I found a trick that when you walk around shooting motion and you interact with your subject, you find some really cool compositions that you wouldn't normally find by having your camera on a tripod. I find sometimes a tripod can be really, just a little too formal. But at the same time, the way that Avedon thought about it was that he wanted, with an 8x10, he wanted to really eliminate any distance between him and his subject. He wanted that relationship to be so tight that the only thing that they could react to was in the expression. So that was one of his little tricks. And that was a very reductive, controlled way of working. So I'm kind of the opposite in a lot of the ways that I work. I kind of move around until I find something and then lock into it, or play with lighting, or find light. So think of it as a paintbrush.
All right, thank you.
I mean, you might not like bagels and lox. All right, guys. Love you. Thank you.